Good afternoon, and we're back, this time talking about how e-mobility can benefit rather than burden the grid. So according to a study by EY and Eurelectric, EVs represent 3.3 million vehicles today, and they're expected to reach 65 million vehicles by 2030 and 130 million by 2035. According to the authors, this would require 65 million chargers by 2035, 85% of which would be residential. So how can we use smart technology to enable EVs and their associated charging infrastructure to actually benefit the grid? Well, to answer that question, I have a few experts with me here today. The first is Max Scherer, who is COO of Monta. His professional career has taken him from consulting, e-commerce to sustainable food production before he landed in the EV industry. Monta is the single operating platform powering the EV charging ecosystem, serving drivers, companies, cities, and the electricity grid. With Monta, you can launch, manage, and scale all your EV needs and operations with one integrated software built to EV better. Thanks, Max, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be part of the gridXdays.
Great to hear. And we also have Marc Mültin, who is founder and CEO of Switch. Over the last 12 years, he's become one of the industry's experts in EV charging communication standards and protocols, like ISO 15118 and OCPP 2.x. Switch, founded in 2020 during the pandemic, builds the software to operate the most reliable, innovative, and easy-to-use charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. Before he founded Switch, Marc was, amongst other things, active in different positions at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology and at Charge Partner. Marc, welcome to the panel.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, really looking forward to this discussion today.
As am I. Joining him, we also have Amrutha Venugopal, who's Vice President of eMobility and GridEdge at Siemens. She worked as a project engineer for a number of years before heading up strategy and business excellence of smart infrastructure for the Middle East at Siemens. She's now based in Switzerland and is responsible for building and scaling their e-mobility solutions and service businesses globally. Amrutha, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And finally, we have Robert Labinski, who has over 12 years experience as an energy solutions specialist, having worked in building solutions, energy tech, focusing on demand response, and a variety of roles from business development to sales optimization. He's worked at Octopus Energy for the last 4 years and is currently head of electrification, which involves creating customer propositions for the electrification of transport, logistics, and fleet vehicles. At the same time, he also works in origination and growth, supporting the scaling of Octopus Energy's core funds and building their renewable generation base to help serve its expanding energy supply globally. Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really happy to be back this year.
Yeah, happy to have you back. So let's dive straight into the questions. Rob, what are some of the major challenges of properly integrating EVs into the home and grid, and how can they be overcome?
So this is a really interesting question, I think. I mean, let's start with the point that 30% of homes in the UK specifically, and probably when you look at the data across Europe as well, don't actually have the ability to charge an electric vehicle at home. So there's kind of one challenge there. But actually, when we think about putting an EV charge point onto a home platform, especially with the electrification of heat, the generation of electricity on our own roofs as well, it becomes an interesting challenge to kind of balance the consumption and the generation coming from a disaggregated user. So we're no longer in a model where centralized generation is supplying the extremities of the grid. We have hyper-local generation, hyper-local constraints on the network, etc. So when we're thinking about EV charge points going into the home, we have to make sure that they are ready and prepared to be part of a smart green ecosystem. And then secondly, I think there's a challenge around the aggregation of that data and the ability to make that technology smart. So I'll speak to a UK example. In order for a home charge point to be integrated into the balancing mechanism, which is the ability to trade energy real time, you need to provide 1 second data. That 1 second data needs to be available 24/7 to the TSO, to National Grid. And at scale, millions of vehicles on the road in the UK providing that data. The system just isn't ready. The TSOs aren't ready. They don't have the technical platforms. And so we need to kind of start to build a system and a technology base that enables that data to be assumed using statistics, and we have to build a trust within that system. So one of those things is controllability, and data points need to be able to be provided at a 1 second level. That needs to be scrapped, right? And so actually OEMs, the data from the car to the manufacturer, then back to the aggregator and back to the grid has a 5 second time lag. So you'll never be able to give that data at a 1 second level. So first, the methodology for enabling smart technology to be able to support the grid needs to change, and a real digital focus on the control systems within the transport, transmission and distribution grids. And then secondly, at a sub-local level, at a home level, those technologies need to be able to be communicate and optimized in line with those times when green energy is available and the network and the grid is least constrained.
A lot to unpack there. Thanks, Rob. Amrutha, you work a lot as well with integrating EVs into buildings. What are some of the biggest challenges there?
See, the thing is, I would like to look at it more as an opportunity rather than a challenge. But definitely, I mean, technology is then the key enabler and contributor. But however, what is also important is to look at it from market structure and business model, which kind of incentivizes and has the power to influence the behavior of these different stakeholders in the whole mix. And when we talk about buildings, like within the buildings, behind the meter, I see a greater opportunity, while I also say that there is a challenge behind it. So at the grid edge, as we call it, we could have PV microgrids, battery storage to optimize the consumption of the building assets, including the additional load that comes with the EVs. So Siemens has been doing, having these technology to provide demand flexibility with these controllable assets in the building, and also considering the ideal comfort conditions of the users within the building. Yeah, and this flexibility that we can provide can compensate for this additional load that is coming from the EVs, which can then interact with the grid and actively participate in the energy market. This is already happening. But now we have the EV chargers as a new kid in the block that needs to be integrated to all of these technology and to also respond to it. And that's where it is a challenge, but also an opportunity for us to look at it in a greater way. And I guess this conversation becomes even more crucial when the new vehicle to grid concept, also enabling EV batteries as microgrid solutions, is taking into consideration. I would like to see, as all of you others in the panel as well, how the whole market evolves around all of these very interesting, I would say, opportunities.
Absolutely. And obviously central to this discussion is the communication between EVs and the grid and buildings and homes. Marc, can you tell us a little bit about the challenges and opportunities around communication?
Sure. Well, obviously, to make this whole vehicle to grid aspect work on an international level, in a seamless way, commercial scale, we need to rely on communication technology that everyone is agreeing upon, and not patchwork solutions or proprietary solutions. So that's where internationally agreed upon communication standards come into play, such as ISO 15118 or 15118. That has evolved over time. The first version of this protocol came out in 2014. It is now deployed into the market because of its seamless user experience through plug and charge, the Tesla-like experience, but bringing it to all car manufacturers and all charging station manufacturers. And now with its newest version, the -20 that was published in April this year, finally we have a bidirectionally coming to it, aside from other benefits that I don't want to go into it, but now Bidirectional charging was so far only reserved to the Japanese CHAdeMO standard, but CHAdeMO is not is kind of like a dying technology, at least outside of Japan. So in Europe and in the US, and in other countries of Asia, we have the combined charging system that is the dominating standard, and that is underpinned communication-wise by ISO 15118. So that is very important to have an interoperable solution that is also driving down costs for both EV charging station manufacturers and car manufacturers. That is one part of the story, the EV to charger communication. Then we have the charger to backend communication, whereby we have the open charge point protocol as a de facto standard. That is probably 99% of the industry out there is using OCPP. The question now becomes, how do we make it bidirectional? Currently, we are at a technological inflection point, kind of like a step change from OCPP 1.6 that is currently deployed probably more than 90% of the chargers out there, to 2.0.1 that has been around for 2-3 years. But it's just very slowly coming to market now. And there's a next version around the corner, 2.1, which is bringing the bidirectionally into it, transporting all the relevant grid signals coming from the utilities and the grid operators down to the charging station. And that is probably going to be published next year, but there are drafts available already. We are working with them to make it happen in an interoperable, seamless way. Then, of course, you need to talk from the managing platform that is managing all these chargers to the grid operators. There is no international agreed upon standard as far as I know. There is, for example, OpenADR that is used in many cases. But what I'm trying to get at is you need a vertically integrated solution where you have all the stakeholders playing together seamlessly with each other. So it's a perfect end user experience. And that's what we are trying to achieve here at Switch, for example, by providing an operating system on the charger, by providing a cloud system, a cloud-based management system to manage those chargers, and collaborating with Nuvi, who is a partner, a pioneer in the vehicle to grid space, where they aggregate all these assets, all these EV batteries that we manage through our platform and provide them as assets on the energy market to provide frequency containment reserve, for example. So it's a complicated market. There are many actors out there, different protocols being spoken. It's important that we collaborate as an industry together to make this mega trend of smart energy services happen sooner than later. And we're working on a project with Nuvi to bring V2G to homes in Europe by late summer next year already, with a big car manufacturer and with their help.
Okay, that actually ties in very well with a question that we got from the audience asking when V2G will be commercially available from your point of view. So you obviously, it's a big topic, bidirectional charging. What is kind of slowing it down, and what will be the first use cases, as you just kind of mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, we did, I think the first use case is vehicle to home, because that's just easier to achieve. Being energy self-sufficient, using the solar power that you have installed on your roof, being more independent. We just heard from Amrutha that we are, from Rob, I think, that we are kind of getting away from the centralized power plants to a decentralized network of microgrids. And especially in times of the geopolitical situation we're in right now, people want to keep their costs down. And so vehicle to home is the first instance of bidirectional charging, but vehicle to grid is going to be an exploding market. There's a research from Bain & Company that says smart energy services and smart charging is going to be 1/3 of $8 to $13 billion market within the coming years up to 2030. So it's a huge, huge potential. We need to distinguish between AC vehicle to grid and DC vehicle to grid, meaning is where does basically the inverter sit? Is it in the car or is it in a charging station? There are certain complexities that come with it to make it grid compliant from the utilities point of view, to make sure we have a safe way of feeding the energy that sits in the battery of the vehicle back into the grid to not cause any blackouts or any disturbances. So yeah, we are at the very top of that. It is a lot of conversations that we need to have with distribution system operators, transmission system operators, utilities, in the end, the homeowners, as Amrutha said, we need to incentivize them properly to participate in these vehicle-to-grid efforts to assure them that, first of all, they don't have an empty battery when they need it. And second of all, that also the warranty of the battery doesn't drop down, and that they have a guarantee from the vehicle manufacturers that even if they participate in vehicle-to-grid programs, that the battery will be fine. They won't be degraded after 6-8 years or something. And this is happening next year, as soon as next year already.
Exciting stuff. And you also mentioned energy prices. It's obviously very important to keep EV charging prices low despite rising energy prices. Max, how can we keep those costs low and kind of integrate price signals better?
Yes, cost. That's what it all comes down to, right, in the end. So I think the main points we touched on across the panel already. I think the key thing you can do, or we as a society can do, to make sure that you don't get bogged down into discussions whether 99 cents at Ionity is actually the reference price for EV charging, is to increase literacy about how EV adoption actually in practice most of the time works, right? And charging at home or charging in your housing association, or a curbside charging maybe in your residential area, is probably the thing that most people will utilize for 90+% of their charging activities. And here you of course have a much lower tariff than in fast charging hubs that you need for long distance travels. But when you look at those, there's still a lot you can do in terms of optimization. Of course, if you are in your own microgrid at home, you have a PV and energy storage locally, you might even be able to optimize this further. But I think for slow charging during times when your car is not moving, i.e. at your workplace parking or overnight parking at home, you can use software to optimize, for example, whether you want to charge energy that has a higher or lower CO2 output, or is only renewable or less renewable. And I think the main point the thing you can do to optimize your pricing exposure here is to actually actively seek dynamic energy tariffs in your home market. That's pretty prevalent in Scandinavia already. There's a bunch of intrepid, I would say, pioneers in Germany and in the UK, Octopus. But it's definitely not something that has spread across all of continental Europe yet. But we at Monta at least believe that with EV will come a much bigger literacy for how much a kilowatt hour actually costs, and how much it actually costs at what time of the day. And we believe that consumers will actually press for a much faster and higher adoption rate of this way of buying and selling electricity, because the truth is that not everybody will be able to live in a self-sustained energy microgrid within their house. There will still be a lot of apartment buildings that will need to be fed from the grid as well. So we believe the biggest lever towards making EV charging affordable, or maybe even a very much more than affordable, really cheap, is increasing literacy about energy pricing and how you can buy energy, and where you get it from, and where you draw those amounts of energy. And I think to a large extent, this is what our industry is also, what our mandate is out there to educate. How do you do this? For most people in Western Europe, it's still the first time they ever buy an EV, right? So it's all first-time buyers who need to learn a lot when they go out there. And I think the things like vehicle-to-grid and frequency or ancillary service and demand response are things that are super interesting and will help the businesses behind, but the driver out there, I think we're in a much earlier stage with most of them still. So making sure that they understand what is the benefit here, what is the reality here. There's still a lot to do here.
Rob, you were nodding your head to a lot of those points. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, I think we shouldn't we love to talk about V2G. I really do. I think we shouldn't underestimate the value of V1G or like optimization of charging in real time right now. Like there is a limited number of V2G enabled vehicles on the road, and future vehicles are all prepping for that solution, for example. But right now, the ability to, in the state of the market that we have right now, the ability to optimize and control when power is going into those vehicles is enough to spearhead and kickstart kind of the ability for us to deliver a green energy market with the technology we have today. So the V2G is a really important discussion, but actually the energy volume within these vehicles will be quite needed to go in every day will be relatively low, and our vehicles are static 92% of the time, and so when we do drive them and need to recharge them, we need to make sure that that's charging at times when it's supporting the deployment of green infrastructure, and it's supporting the consumer getting the cheapest possible cost for that electron into their vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And Amrutha, there are a lot of stakeholders involved in the things that we're talking about, new technology and grid operators, site operators, CPOs, EV users, OEMs, and all of that. How can we ensure that all of their interests are aligned?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned before, right? It's while technology is actually one of the key enablers, making things easier and much more attractive to each of these stakeholders to engage in these interactions. What might really play a role is how the whole market will eventually be structured, the business models around it develop, and how that incentivizes the different behavior of these stakeholders. That's really what it would pan up to, and this is where all of the industry experts need to have these communications, like it is happening right now with all the open standard protocols and so on, to kind of spearhead and see how we can go towards a certain direction that has an overall outcome that leads to more sustainability targets and the output that we would want to have without having outrageous investments into the grid and so on. Yeah. So I think it's through these conversations and structuring the market that we would see these interests align more and more.
Mm-hmm. And we've had a question from the audience. Amrutha, you deal on a global level as well, so I think you might be able to start us off on this one. National differences have come up a lot in the last 2 days. How do national circumstances impact the rollout of solutions across Europe?
I think this discussion has been happening even before the introduction of EVs, right? When we talk about the grid stability and how the different national regulations, and when we consider it more as a regional, how the cooperation needs to happen between the different countries, that has been ongoing discussion already. It's just that with EVs and the new, let's say, unexpected loads that the companies or the TSOs are expecting, now the discussion has gone to a different level and accelerated it. But I don't think these are new conversations that are happening in terms of cooperating at a regional level and how we can ensure that the grid stability is maintained, not just looking at it from a national, but more from a regional level.
Would anyone else like to jump in and talk about the national differences?
I mean, when it comes to providing, I fully agree with you, Rob, that V1G smart charging is super important, and that's going to be the focus on rolling out, making cars an asset rather than a burden on the grid, to also help them reduce the load when it's necessary or increase the load when it's necessary. But when it comes to feeding energy back to the grid, we have to deal with what is called grid codes, which is basically a set of rules and regulations imposed by the grid operators and how you're allowed to feed energy back into the grid, which is already in place for solar inverters, for example. But now we don't need to talk about how are we going to make it happen for EVs to be recognized in these regulations, in these application guides and rules, to make that happen. And there are very big differences on national level. Grid codes are not harmonized, and even within a country, like within Germany, we have thousands, I think, of utilities, and even within Germany we have differing grid codes. But I know that currently there is an initiative to harmonize these grid codes across Europe. I think it's an EN 5045 something. Anyway, and the actors within CharIN, that is the CharIN is the charging interface initiative that is driving forward the combined charging system as a standard, is trying to get all the stakeholders also in Brussels to agree on how to make EVs part of the solution in this new harmonized EU regulation, which will then trickle down into national law as early as next year, or is supposed to be trickling down as early as next year. So there is luckily an initiative underway, because we need to make it happen on an international level, on a commercial scale, interoperable. It's not sustainable to have all kinds of different grid codes in all different countries. It just makes the whole system more complex. There's lots of work to do, but we are on the right path. And even between US and Europe. Again, US, on a federal state, you have different grid codes. So it's the same story again. And we need to try to harmonize as much as possible, as quick as possible.
Max, would you add anything to that? Sorry.
Grid operators are stuck in the past a little bit. Some don't even have digital means of communication. I know Octopus can sing a long song about that. So yeah, we need to get them more into the digital era.
Yes, if I may. So I think I'm 100% aligned. I think I know a few people who sell PV installations in Germany, and they have whole departments filling out paper applications, right? So it's a big digitalization effort there. But on the other hand of that, I believe that I'm a very commercially thinking person. I think we can't wait for the regulator to make a play here, right? I believe there's many reasons why we want to push EV adoption, to keep growing as it does now, right? It's the right thing for the future. It will reduce CO2 emissions. It will help us reach sustainability goals. So sometimes I feel like we, especially in I would say in some parts of continental Europe, the priorities seem a little bit off. It's like innovation follows the law, whereas sometimes the law should maybe follow innovation. So I feel there must be a balance. We can't wait for the EU to make the right law to make sure that we do the right thing. We need to do the right thing, and then we need to make sure that is reflected. Maybe a little bit controversial here, but I don't know. That's the way I see this.
I agree with you, 100% agree with you, absolutely agree with you. There wasn't a regulatory change that allowed us to provide a dynamic agile tariff to consumers in the UK and give them 48 prices in a 24-hour period. That came from innovation, and the commercial organizations taking that risk. There are fundamental issues in this market that are causing that problem, and we need to kind of address some of those. And we talked about open protocol, things like vehicle OEMs sharing state of charge data openly, so we can start to optimize charging. We need to provide transparency of energy pricing. We need to give people the ability to opt into these propositions, and which shouldn't be state legislated either. Like the idea that the government can come in and turn your EV charging off is absolute no-no from our point of view. But we've proven time and time again at Octopus that if you give the consumer the information they need and the ability to opt in and participate, they will do. Agile tariff that we launched back in 2016, we saved EV chargers peak time consumption dropped by 47%. And more recently, we've been doing a thing called a winter workout, where we've asked just over 3 million customers in the UK to participate in reducing and participating in the winter market, and to get a financial incentive. And more than 10% of those customers we've reached out to have said yes, absolutely, we'll be involved. That 10% will be way more than we need to solve some of the critical issues, and they all get a financial benefit. So innovation and the market needs to follow I agree with you, the organizations that are disrupting, because disruption doesn't come from legislation. That doesn't happen.
And on this line of yeah, go for it. Okay. Yeah, on the line of thought of transparency, Amrutha, you've mentioned in the past that historical patterns of EV usage are really important. How can we use them to then optimize what will happen in the future?
Yeah, I think Robert mentioned a lot of topics when it comes to, let's say, how the data and transparency can help a lot, and I think it is key to then thinking about further optimizing, and these patterns and trends, not just historical, but if we can actually predict some of these patterns and trends in terms of the EV usage, I think that's going to tremendously improve in introducing even new business models, like understanding what kind of charging behavior do we expect, and how can we even influence some of these charging behaviors. For example, range anxiety. How is the range anxiety going to change? Just like how we charge a mobile phone, some people are okay with having like 20% remaining charge and going around, whereas others get freaked out when it is less than 50%. Is the same case when it comes to EV drivers. So how is that going to shift in the future? Where do drivers usually like to charge when it comes to location? What is the time of charging? And therefore, what is the energy consumption peak that we are expecting? All of these patterns and trends are important. Why? Because it will influence the decisions that we want to make in terms of how do we want to scale up this infrastructure, whether it is to not compromise on the driver users' needs, because again, that's important for EV adoption more and more. It's also important to make sure that we meet our sustainability targets put forward. It is also important that we make these decisions of scaling up the infrastructure without having a burden in the grid or having a lot of issues when it comes to the stability of the grid. So to make informed decision for all of this, I think it's important to first start with analyzing and understanding about the EV drivers' usage patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amrutha. And Rob, obviously, as well as, different people will have different usage patterns, different sites have different needs. We've got en route charging, destination charging, home charging. How can we make sure that all of these different requirements are met, and how important are digital solutions in meeting these different needs?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So we have to make a couple of assumptions here in order to answer this question, right? My assumptions would be that we want to deploy the right infrastructure in the right locations at the cheapest possible cost to the network or the individual, the taxpayer, I suppose, and we want to support a green energy market accelerating. We talked about previously about domestic level OEM sharing state of charge data. I'm going to talk about 3 tangible projects that we actually delivered. So Intelligent Octopus is a really great example of this. We asked the consumer what state of charge that they need at home by the next morning. They put in 60%, I'm leaving at 6:30. We now have the capability to charge that vehicle at the right time for the cheapest possible cost, supporting that grid. Now we can take, it's not necessarily that that model is right. What we do is we provide a subsidized energy rate for that, and we take all the risk on the energy market. But actually that data availability, that communication, the standardization of protocols, all of that stuff will enable other organizations to take that information and innovate in that space and provide alternative solutions. Like there might be drivers who want to be exposed to the frequency market and earn frequency market credits. There may be some people who don't want to be anywhere near that risk and just want a fixed energy price at X pence per kilowatt hour overnight. So at a home level, we and even in the workplace, our consumption profiles are going to be totally opposite as well. I think the second thing we want to kind of think about is better time integration with local energy markets. So when real-time local green energy is being delivered onto the grid, we need to be able to consume and optimize. That isn't going to happen by ringing someone up and saying, hey, could you mind driving and plugging your car in now because the wind turbines. We've got a proposition in the UK, it's called the Fan Club. We provide the fan wind speed to the consumer in their home and it's a model we're rolling out across commercial as well. You get visibility of the green assets that you're tied to, and when wind turbines spinning, you get 20% off the cost of your energy, and when it's spinning above 80% of its maximum output or a specific meters per second of wind, you get 50% of your energy price. And what that does is that literally influences behavior. When people start to set up build their own tech solutions, ask their home assistants to monitor that information. They set up their platforms, and you get innovators. But then what happens in that environment is we're able to kind of provide that data to the consumer, and they're able to ingest it and look at it and interact with it in a way that benefits them best. So that's key. And then I also think this final piece, this on the kind of hub model or the rapid charging infrastructure piece, we need to stop duplicating infrastructure. It's crazy that we're building electric bus recharging hubs, paying for a grid connection, putting 150 kilowatt rapids into that location, and closing the gates between 7 in the morning and 7 p.m. while the buses are on the road, and then having to build that charging infrastructure down the road. It's just absolutely crazy to me. So I think a better business models need to change. We need to think about how the technology and the electric vehicles within our communities and the different roles that they play can utilize the same infrastructure and can be optimized against grid availability and green energy in real time. So the kind of 3 tangible models that those requirements need to be met, but the requirements are, go back to that the infrastructure is deployed that meets everybody's needs at the cheapest possible cost, and it enables a green energy system.
Yeah. Easy, done, we've solved it. I think incentivizing EV drivers to charge at the right time is a really big, interesting topic. Max, do you agree with what Rob said there? Would you add anything of how we can best incentivize users?
So in general, I agree with pretty much everything that Rob said. I think probably the biggest thing, and you're touching on the biggest public debate also about, do we have enough charging infrastructure to meet future demand, is the topic about accessibility of charging infrastructure. Yeah, so are CapEx deployed, and are those CapEx actually being, repaid because they're being used, or are they actually being, are they locked up, or only have limited accessibility to whoever might need them? And I think, plug and charge could be a phenomenal way of making that easy and accountable, right? So that everybody can be sure that that they get paid the right amount by just plugging in, without the need for a specific access card or a specific RFID card or a specific charging app, or being part of an organization that has access to these specific spaces. But in the meantime, I think there's a lot about making sure that giving access is safe and easy for the organizations and for the companies and for the municipalities that invested that money. And for the time being, we believe that software is the solution for that. And there it's all about making sure that every charger is covered. So whether that's by an aggregator like Hubject or Gerev or eClearing, or whether that's and this would be my preferred way in the future, whether that's via an open OCPI layer where everybody just signs up with each other. But in the end, it's about making sure that interface towards the end consumer exists, and that interface is being trusted by the operator of the charge point. And that's something that we at Monta try to push a lot, making sure that this security for both parties here is very clear and very, very apparent, that accessibility is guaranteed, and that reliability of the charging experience is also guaranteed. So we believe there's a lot about still making people comfortable with how this energizing your mobility needs is actually done. So there's a lot about creating a user experience and a user interface that is intuitive, that is still gives power, but that also makes it easily accessible and understandable how you do this, where you do it, and who you're interacting with. So yes, I agree with everything Rob said. I added 2 or 3 points.
If I may add, my 2 cents to this. So accessibility, reliability, seamlessness for the user are very important talking points here. I'm not sure if you are aware of this study that was published by the University of Berkeley, California, in June, I think, about the reliability of public fast charging stations, whereby they said a quarter of the 657 chargers are not reliable, are inaccessible. They're down, basically. Just imagine if a quarter of our gasoline, gas stations were down. This would be outcry. It would be enraged. How is it possible that we are, what's the English word for that? That we are basically accepting that this is possible. The charging infrastructure that has been deployed so far, the charge point operators, they have sometimes zero visibility of what's going on in a charging network. Maybe they have like a basic binary view of, yes, it's available, or no, it's not available. But if it's not available or there's an error, they have no idea what's going on. Is it the charger that's broken? Is it the connection issue? Is it because the plug wasn't plugged into the vehicle? Is the communication issues? There is a myriad of faults that can happen. And right now with the existing technology that is deployed communication-wise, they are all, it's basically a black box. That's why it's so important to leverage the newest technology that is available through communication standards, such as OCPP 2.0.1. I just mentioned it because that is giving a whole new granular level of visibility of what's going on the charging station. It's like putting your charger on an MRI scanner and seeing what exactly is going on. And this giving this visibility back to the charge point operator, or ideally directly to their maintenance staff, and providing automatic alerts saying, sorry, there is something wrong with your air cooling system or liquid cooling system, or the fan speed is below a certain threshold. Then the maintenance person can automatically order the right piece, go to the charging station, replace it. It dramatically reduces your maintenance costs, thereby increasing the charger uptime, increasing customer retention. And it's a win-win situation for everyone. Higher return on investment for the charge point operator, higher acceptance of the charging infrastructure for the end user, or trust. Because we're not talking about range anxiety so much anymore. We're talking about charger anxiety. And this is just unacceptable. We must do better than that and leverage the technology that is available at hand.
And alongside that, obviously, charging anxiety, making the experience as intuitive and easy as possible for users. Max, how can we streamline that process for users to make charging, paying, finding, all of that of EV charging as simple as possible?
Well, I guess that touches on a bit of what I replied to Rob there earlier. And it ties in neatly to what Marc just said. I think it's all about ensuring that the industry runs on the same standards or on standards that are at least interpreted, let's say, similarly, and on software layers, making sure that these similarly interpreted communication standards are then reinterpreted and communicated to the user correctly. Because our experience with OCPP has been that, yes, it's actually a fairly tightly written protocol, but we now at Monta, we work with almost 300 different wallbox and DC charger models, and OCPP has literally never been the same on any box, right? So engineers also take liberty in how to interpret these protocols. So doing that work and making sure that integration, that communication with these boxes is actually seamless or feels seamless to the user is probably one of the most important things that you can do to bridge that gap, you know. But coming back to the question, I think the most important thing is that operators, especially of public charging situations, but also operators of semi-public charging opportunities, that they agree to share resources with the wider public. That's done admirably well in some markets already. So if I look at Denmark or Germany, I think aggregator acceptance is very high. But if I look at markets like the UK or Sweden or Norway, you know, the big poster child of EV adoption, there literally is no aggregator that's active. So every CPO on their own. So in Norway, you still have 13 different charging cards if you're lucky. So here, I think it's a lot about educating operators of charge point networks that collaborating and opening to aggregators, whether that's a charging app, whether that's an EMSP, whether that's, you know, a new solution on the block, is actually something that enables them to make their business case more attractive, rather than endangering that they lose market share and revenue potential. So I think it's a pretty clear sign of a very immature market. Everybody's trying to protect their castle. So it's a massive opportunity also for companies to do things differently. But this is the major hurdle here. Accessibility is about collaboration and cooperation. The amount of capital that is needed to deploy to build all of the chargers that are needed by the growing demand for EVs will never be carried by one operator, right? It will always be multiple, and it will be very small ones and very large ones. And the only way to achieve a charging experience that is similar to an experience you have on an ICE car at the moment is if you have interoperability and accessibility to all of these chargers for everybody. And that literally only comes via cooperation and collaboration via at least somewhat standardized communication protocols.
Yeah, and tying this topic of collaboration in, Rob also mentioned before the need to change business models with the buses example. Amrutha, what do you think about changing business models? Do companies need to change? And if so, what do they need to keep in mind when doing that?
I think a lot of it comes. First of all, I agree with some of the points that are made in terms of availability and reliability, and how the infrastructure needs to open up more and more, and not having private chargers because it's not the optimal use of assets that are being built. So I agree with all of the points, and there comes also, I think, the opportunity for the new business models. If the right incentives are set, and there is a lot of push that was happening from the government entities in terms of scaling up this infrastructure and having the infrastructure in terms of to make charging accessible. But parallelly, what should have been done is to ensure that they are available. And they are not broken down. Yeah. So this is also part of it. And there comes again an opportunity for additional business models. And to be honest, in my role, when I'm looking at it with solutions and services, one of the key topics of service is to make sure that the charging infrastructure is available and there is a higher uptime. And this will become more and more important when the owner of the infrastructure realizes how much of lost opportunity it is for each downtime that they have. And that comes again with more accessibility, more transparency, more understanding, awareness, both from the EV charger, driver side, but also from the CPO's side. And so absolutely, to answer your questions, some of these pockets in terms of having these new business model, I think comes from the challenges that have been already mentioned by the panel members.
Thanks, Amrutha. And we've had a question from the audience from Ernest. It ties in with what we've been talking about, education and awareness. Bidirectional charging sounds quite complicated and might be difficult to communicate. Marc, are we running the risk of confusing and scaring off consumers that would otherwise switch to eMobility?
That's a very good point. Education is super, super important. Max mentioned it already. Educating not only, we are in the B2B business at Switch, targeting towards charging station manufacturers that need to be educated, but also charge point operators that are in the B2B space, but in the end, they are customers as well. It's like a B2B2C, a B2B2C business. And I come from a very technical background, but I know the need for translating the complexity into benefits for the end customer. When they understand how the technology that's available can build a better business case for them, or for end customers to earn money with their assets like EV cars that are standing around 23 hours of the day. Why not use the big battery that is the biggest, most complex, most expensive component of the vehicle? Why not make money with it? That makes complete sense to everyone. And when it comes to bidirectional charging, yes, it's complicated. It's especially AC vehicle to grid. it's a hard nut to crack. But that's not something for our customers or the end customer to think about. We need to distill this down into a very easy to understand, very easy to comprehend, opportunity for the end customer. Be it simple tariffs that, for example, Octopus is pioneering in this space with their Octopus. Is it Universe? I think, how you call it at the moment. It's amazing what you can provide. You just opt in into this tariff, and we take care of making sure that you can earn money by providing a car to the grid, and you are in full control of whether or not you want to now charge a car, no matter of whether or not you have opted into the VG service. You are in control. If you want your car fully charged, you will have it fully charged. We need to give them the control and that security. And on the other hand, just giving them the opportunity to say, okay, let's say between 30 and 70% of state of charge of the battery, I allow vehicle to grid. Outside of that window, I don't. The state of charge is something everyone understands, like from your phone. You know what the state of charge is, if it's 50% charged or not. So education, not only on the end customer level, but also on the B2B customer level, making them understand what's the benefits, what's the opportunity, and that we are solving the problem for them. They don't have to do it. The solution needs to be as transparent as possible to the end customer.
Rob, would you want to add anything there?
I'd say that I think traditionally the market has assumed that that consumers are disengaged, that they don't want to participate, and that they are digitally illiterate. In some senses, like my parents are 70, they've both got a smartphone, they can hail an Uber, they can smart charge an EV, not a problem, right? And actually that proportion of the population that maybe isn't digital native or a digital immigrant in terms of the use of technology is an aging population. So actually, I think we make a couple of assumptions there that inhibit our ability to deploy stuff. And I agree. So in terms of visibility of benefit, if we can translate the benefit of being actively involved and take away the complexity of the decision making in the really hard parts of the market, then you'll get mass adoption of that technology. V2G is a difficult technology, but one, I want to make sure that my lease payments aren't going to go up because I'm providing V2G. That's part of the market that's not comfortable with that type of technology yet. Number two is that I want to make sure that my car is charged, that gets me to the place that I want to go to tomorrow when I wake up at the time I want to leave. And number three is I want to do that at the cheapest possible cost. And so we can expose that to the consumer in a really simple way, through either app or through pricing signals in their tariff, etc., that enables them to engage at the level that they want to engage with. And then if you think about, participating in smart charging or load shifting or V2G or whatever it is later on the network, right? I don't know whether we'll get to that point, a rapid charge of V2G. I don't think that's the point of that environment, but we're already proving in trials. We're working with Chargy in the UK and Osprey. We've provided a discounted period of charging at 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Because one of the biggest problems with EV load is that it follows a solar curve beautifully, almost all day long until you get to kind of 4 o'clock, and then you have all the people coming from home using rapid charging infrastructure that creates this kind of bulge on the sides of the solar curve reduction that are exposed to the highest prices in the most critical times of the grid, like in terms of availability and capacity. And so by providing price signals at a later point, those drivers are, and we can see it in the data, deciding to shift the time that they charge from 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. on the way home from work to outside of that period, or they're planning to charge at an earlier period of time when the prices are lower. So you just have to give consumers the signal, just like, I carry my milk under my arm and like a box of cereal and a packet of bacon and whatever it is home from the supermarket because I don't want to pay 15p for a bag, right? Even when it comes to things like charging your EV, when it's the difference between paying 67 pence a kilowatt or 99 cents, what we said earlier, and 50 cents or 35p a kilowatt hour, we will proactively change our schedule to accommodate that, because we can see the benefit to our pocket, and especially in a market now where cost of living crisis, and we're right at the point now where all of the evidence from global warming, consumer change, digitization, and cost of living, it means that there's no way back. So people are proactively engaging, trying to find ways to engage with these cost reduction schemes, and we'll do it happily, just through the surfacing of the price signals or the behavioral change that they need to do through a very simple format. So we shouldn't assume people don't want to do this. We should just make it available, and then people get involved. And there's evidence that across the whole of Europe, multiple different technologies, multiple markets, that people will proactively engage with something if they can see the financial benefit or the social benefits of them.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rob. We've got a few more questions from the audience, focusing on bidirectional charging. So, Marc, how will providers of bidirectional charging deal with the issue of battery degradation?
So there is the perceived degradability of EV batteries when you do bidirectional charging. However, there have been studies already that say bidirectional charging actually can extend the lifetime of a battery. What is really stressing the battery is when you're on the road, when you're driving fast, because these are the really strong high currents that are then drawn from the battery. That's what really is causing battery degradation. And the second factor is calendar aging. It's just the lifetime of the battery that is reducing its state of health, and that's the technological term here. But V2G, if you have it in a certain window, let's say not in the extremes of 5 to 10% state of charge, and maybe not in the upper 80 to 90% state of charge, but in between 30 to 70% or 40 to 60%, this is what car manufacturers currently realize is a very healthy kind of like range of state of charge within which vehicle to grid is really, really healthy for the battery. It's not really degrading the battery, and car manufacturers are willing to give guarantees if you do allow a vehicle to grid in these windows. And I do believe car manufacturers will probably also maybe technologically limit it themselves where cars or in which window cars can do V2G. So long answer, short, bringing to a short cliff note is V2G is not really the major factor, if at all, for degrading batteries.
And Max, along that line of thought, how important is it that we kind of better integrate hardware and software to, optimize the usage of EVs and batteries and everything like that? How can we really use smart technology to its full capacity?
I think more integration is better. But in general, I think there's this is a lot about the standards work, right? And I think here we're talking about the OCPP route, and then maybe charging network, the OCPI route. And I think if we manage to upgrade kind of the installed base, or at least the new to be installed base of chargers to actually use OCPP 2.01 or the follow-up version, I think we've gone a major step. Until then, you probably need to have a few workarounds. So you probably need interactions or integrations with the OEMs. Most of the EVs have an API, and the chargers, and a third system that aggregates and makes sure that these play along nicely. Which also works fine, but I guess if you talk about future vision, this is probably something driven by OCPP. At least that's my belief. But I do believe that's not a process overnight. A protocol adoption, if it's not if it's open, is something that can take a while, especially upgrading assets that are that maybe actually don't allow remote firmware upgrades, like a few chargers out there, right? So it's not an easy task. So you will always need to make sure that the software powering the ecosystem retains backward compatibility as well, which ensues technological debt, development resources that are tied up, etc. pp. So this is I guess an opportunity or a problem that is literally only just starting, because installed base is still so small. But making sure that the hardware is able and capable of dealing with firmware upgrades in an easy and sustainable way and future-proof way, I think would be a major step in that direction.
Thanks, Max. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but thank you all so much for joining us and talking about so many issues of business models, mindset changes, new technology, a lot of exciting things to come, and I'm sure a lot of things for happening in your fields as well. So thanks for coming and have a great afternoon. We'll be back in 2 minutes talking about how we can incentivize prosumers to make sustainable choices.